Okay, so let's continue our discussion of subsistence strategies. We left off with horticulture, and we're going to continue with pastoralism, agriculture, and industrialism in this video. Okay, and so subsistence strategies are the customary ways, the tactics, the plan of attack that societies of people share in order to have their survival needs met, like food getting, food production, clean water, and the resources that they need, the tools and the shelter and things like that that they need in their daily lives. Okay, and so we know from the previous video about foraging and horticulture. It's a very different mindset from the one that we live in today. Foraging kind of got us up through that first section of the demographic transition model, and then the second section of the demographic transition model kind of includes that transition from foraging to horticulture and also pastoralism. And so I believe your textbook says something about that intensive or subsistence agriculture. That's the phrase that they use when they're talking about horticulture. That it started about 10,000 years ago. Actually, archaeology evidence shows that it was about 13,000 years ago in the different places around the world where you have societies that are close to water resources, that are around like the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, where the weather is really nice and really good for nice in terms of production of regular crops from year to year. Okay, so another thing that we have archaeological evidence for around 10,000 years ago is pastoralism. And pastoralism is a subsistence strategy that focuses the calorie source comes primarily from the types of animals that you can herd. Okay, so you can't herd chickens and you can't herd pigs and you can't herd those kinds of things. Herding animals would include things like sheep and goats and yaks and cattle of all sorts of bovine things, camels. All of these kinds of things are herding animals. And so human beings innovated a way to keep and domesticate these kinds of animals and begin having a predictable birth rate in these herding animals so that you can rely on their dairy products, their blood products, and their meat products for food, and then also all the other parts of the animal when you do have to slaughter one, all the other parts of the animal for other purposes like clothing or for a covering on a shelter or for a carrying thing like a canteen or a bag of some sort. And so you use the bones to make knives out of or spear points. You use everything in the animal. And so just like my comments about foraging and horticulture, pastoralism is an extremely sustainable and very environmentally respectful way of getting your food, a food getting strategy. Okay, and so one of my favorite pastoral groups to talk about is the Maasai in Kenya and Tanzania in Eastern Africa. There are other pastoral groups. The Kurds, for instance, are a pastoral group. The name of the group in the Arctic region of Asia is escaping me at the moment, but there are lots of examples. They have herds of caribou. Anyway, the name is escaping me. You can certainly look it up. But pastoral groups exist all over the world today. But they're kind of in conflict with the modern way. And when I say modern way, I mean the way you and I think of how we should get food. And so pastoralists need a whole lot of land in order to sustain the kinds of herds that support large populations of people. So for instance, the Maasai in East Africa, there's several villages of Maasai and they have 500, 1,500 people or more in these villages, at maybe up to 4,000 or so. And they need huge populations of animals and a lot of land and water resources in order to sustain those herds. And the way pastoralists pastoralists usually sustain the herds is they move the herd from one field to the next, one water source to the next, so that they use what is naturally occurring in the environment. It's kind of like foraging. But you're driving the herd to forage on the land of what they need in order to sustain themselves. Maybe the land where you live, like in the very arid region of Africa that I mentioned, maybe the land there does not produce the kind of plant and animal resources that you would need for a human population to survive. But those grasses and plants, even after they're dried out, cattle can use dried hay, for instance, as a perfect way of sustaining themselves. But you and I cannot eat dried hay and get any calories from it, but we can eat the cow, right? Or we can eat the blood from the cow. Quite often, pastoralists do bloodletting from the animals that they have in their herd, so they don't have to kill them. When you kill an animal, it's no good to you anymore. It can't help reproduce and make more animals, and so quite often they take a little bit of blood from the jugular and patch it back up so they don't kill the animal, and you get really good knowledge, really advanced knowledge about whether the animal is sick or whether the animal, you shouldn't take blood from that animal at that time. It's a perfectly clean. Some of you right now are like, ew, this, they're going to get sick. No, they have so much knowledge about how to prevent all of these things that you and I don't have that knowledge. And so that's why maybe you're having kind of a gross reaction to this idea. And anyway, so, you can look up the Maasai. It's a beautiful culture in Africa and learn about some of these calorie getting strategies that don't kill the animal. Of course, dairy also is something that you can get from the females of these herds. And so those are ways that you can get animal protein into your diet without actually consuming meat. They do consume meat. You will consume meat if you are a Maasai, but it's not like you have it 3 meals a day. You have those calories from those animals in a different way that does not reduce the number in your herd. Your herd tends to represent your family, your community's wealth. And so you don't want to kill animals in your herd because you'll be just like burning money. You'll be reducing your social status, reducing your economic position within a society. So pastoralism is also a subsistence strategy, and modern day folks don't really like it too much because we like to put up fences. We like a fence right here, and we want to put a dam on the water source, and we want to use it for agriculture, and that won't work with a pastoralist. They need to be able to move their animals freely across hundreds of square miles and hectares. They need to be able to move their animals, and a fence gets in the way, and a dam dries up their water source. And so there's sometimes conflict between the modern mindset and this perfectly fine, perfectly successful subsistence strategy called pastoralism. Okay, but chapter 11 is called agriculture, and that's because agriculture is the dominant subsistence strategy that got the West, and actually places like China and India. Agriculture is the dominant subsistence strategy that enabled a boom in population to occur that Thomas Malthus was witnessing when he said, hold up, y'all, we're going to have a problem. The population is booming and the food supply can't keep up. That was the general premise that the doomsday premise that he promoted, okay? So agriculture is manipulation of the environment, either plants or animals. So you can have a fish farm or you can have a ranch with cattle on it. These kinds of things would be included in agriculture. So it's not simply a wheat farm or a soybean farm or a corn farm. It's also about, animals and animal husbandry. So it kind of encompasses or uses all of these techniques in one, except agriculture focuses on surplus. It's an economic system more as equally, not more. It's a food getting strategy, but it also encompasses an economic system, because if you own land. And now all of a sudden, with agriculture, ownership of land comes into play. And if you own land, then you can control that land use, you can plant things on that land, you can intentionally produce a surplus, and you can sell that surplus or trade that surplus for whatever it is that you need to increase your social position. So with agriculture, which is our foundations of our human society that we live in today, with agriculture comes all kinds of social problems that are analyzed today as issues that people have to deal with. You didn't have to deal with social inequality in foraging. You didn't have to deal with, euthanizing old people in horticulture, like lots of Western countries, Canada, for instance, promotes today. You didn't have to deal with a lot of environmental degradation or climate change and things like this based on these historical ways of food getting strategies. But with agriculture, you own land, and so you don't have the option of moving your field from here to another place next year to produce the same amount. You have to start artificially manipulating the soil in order to keep the yield up, and you see some problems come into play. So for instance, if you have a horse to help you pull a plow or something, well, you can use horse manure in order to build up the soil. But there's all kinds of bacteria and critters that can be in that can make you and I sick if it happens to contaminate the food that's being produced in that soil. And so you see a whole bunch of problems come up. You see owners, taking higher social position than workers, and you start to see that oppression and that just division within our society of wealth versus poverty. You also see further division in males versus females and aged versus young in our society. Females have a lower social position, aged people have a lower social position, and able-bodied males have the higher social position, because in early agriculture, you did everything by hand. You maybe had an ox, you maybe had a horse, you maybe had some beasts of burden that helped you, but you did pretty much everything by hand. So if you were the farm owner, you had to hire workers to help you work that land. It was very labor intensive, and you would produce surplus, and maybe you paid the workers with some of your surplus, but then you also sold some to get money or to trade for resources, just like the clothes that are on your back, or for the the furniture that's in your home or whatever. But you end up with a bigger division, a bigger population, because you have more food, so you can support larger populations. But you also see some of these social problems that come into play in modern life, and their origins come from the changes in social dynamics that agriculture brought about. And so this chapter, agriculture, doesn't really focus on this early phase of these social changes where you see this social stratification or inequality in society. But we're going to add some of that to the conversation. Industrialism is the thing that Thomas Malthus didn't live long enough to see its effect on agriculture, because what happened with industrialization is machines, the Industrial Revolution, right? Machines were invented, and the people who were inventing these machines focused on agricultural pursuits, farming pursuits. So remember, in the third phase of the demographic transition, where you have a surplus and therefore it's supporting a larger population, not everybody has to work in agriculture anymore, because there's a surplus and you can simply just, buy the food that you need rather than having to participate in actually making it. And so what you see is a lot of innovation and scientific inquiry and invention that brought about the Industrial Revolution. And through the Industrial Revolution, you have industrialism as a subsistence strategy. You begin to have engines that can operate machines for a specific purpose on the farm, and maybe that engine, maybe that tractor, maybe that early machine that helped make farm work easier, it was wonderful, but it also cut your job on the farm, so you don't have that job anymore. And so you see further gulfs. You see larger separations and larger spans of social inequality that happen, not just with agriculture becoming the customary way of life, but definitely with industrialism taking over from that hands-on agriculture to machines-on agriculture. You see the surplus absolutely boom, and you see fewer and fewer people owning things and more people having to be workers, unskilled workers, and we have to figure out a different field to go into because they don't need us on the farm anymore. And so you have to find another field to go into. You see the rise and necessity of education to get you into some other field that is going to sustain you as an individual, because the culture in general changes significantly and you don't have that same role in society. You heard in the demographic transition model discussion in the third phase of demographic transition, the crude birth rate goes down because we don't need all those children. A farming family doesn't need to produce all those children within its own household anymore. You don't need 18 kids to work on the farm. And so kids' position in society also decreases. And so nowadays, a lot of times people think of children as an imposition. A lot of times people opt not to have children at all because they're expensive and you can't focus on yourself and they take too much time and you never know how they're going to turn out and all this kind of stuff. Whereas in agriculture and earlier, children were integral parts of carrying on the culture into the next generation because we needed those workers. And so from early age, you were participating in the subsistence strategy. But with industrialization, not anymore. We don't need you to interact intimately with the food getting strategy. And so a shift happens in our mindset when we think about children, and they are kind of a burden now instead of an integral, necessary part of the workforce that adds value to a household. Okay, and so these were a very quick overview of each of these 5 things, and we are going to talk more about agriculture and how it changed the world and the agricultural revolutions in our next video. I will see you there.